When I collapsed at my graduation ceremony, the doctors called my parents. They never came. Instead, my sister tagged me in a photo. Family day without the drama. I said nothing. Days later, still weak and hooked to machines, I saw 75 missed calls. And a text from Dad. "We need you. Answer immediately." Without thinking twice, I just stared at the screen, wondering how it was possible to feel abandoned and needed at the same time. The hospital room felt too quiet, too white, too cold for what was happening inside me. My body still ached from the collapse. Weeks of pushing myself through finals, skipping meals, pretending I was stronger than I felt. But the ache in my chest wasn't from the floor or the monitors. It was from the realization that the people who were supposed to care the most didn't show up. Not even a call. Not even a question. Celia's photo burned in my mind. Her perfect smile, her hand on our mother's shoulder, the caption dripping with petty cruelty. Family day without the drama. I guess I was the drama. I guess almost passing out in front of hundreds of people didn't fit her vision of a good family moment. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I had always known where I stood. But lying there alone, listening to the soft beep of the heart monitor, I felt something inside me shift. A line. A quiet snap. Then came Dad's message. "We need you." 2 words that were never used unless something was wrong, badly wrong. My parents never needed me for love, comfort, or connection. Only crisis. Only cleanup. Only when they were drowning. My fingers trembled as I set the phone down. Part of me wanted to block the number and never look back. Another part, the tired part that still hoped for something different, wondered if going home would finally force the truth into the light. I closed my eyes and inhaled painfully. I didn't owe them anything. But the unanswered questions pressed heavier than the oxygen mask. Why now? Why urgently? Why after ignoring a medical emergency? By the time the nurse came in to check my vitals, I had made my decision. I wasn't going for them. I was going because I needed to know why the same people who left me alone in a hospital bed suddenly sounded terrified without me. The drive back to Redwood Hollow felt heavier than the suitcase on my lap. Every mile made my stomach tighten, but I kept going. The moment I turned onto the old gravel road leading to the house, the air shifted. Quiet, still, almost watchful. Nothing about it felt like home. Grant opened the door before I even knocked, his face stretched into a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "You made it," he said, like I'd shown up late to a chore instead of returning from a hospital bed. Lorraine stood behind him, hands clasped, a soft, "Oh, hello, Marin," slipping out like she was greeting a neighbor she barely knew. Celia appeared at the top of the stairs, leaning on the railing with a smirk that disappeared the second our eyes met. No hug. No concern. Just stiff acknowledgement and that strange tension floating in the air. Inside, everything felt staged. The living room was spotless, too spotless. A candle burned even though no one in this house ever used them. And every conversation dropped into silence the moment I stepped through a doorway. Whispers died instantly, glances were exchanged, and that uneasy feeling crawled along my spine like static. Grant followed me into the kitchen and cleared his throat. "We just needed help around the property," he said, casual on the surface but clipped at the edges. I nodded, though nothing about the house suggested they were preparing for repairs. No tools out. No plans. No explanations. Just vague words and careful distance. I noticed the locked doors first. Ones that had never been locked in my entire childhood. The basement, the shed, even the office. Every knob I tried was met with resistance. When I asked Lorraine about it, she smiled too quickly and said, "Just keeping things organized." She didn't meet my eyes. Celia avoided me entirely unless she had to pass by, and when she did, she offered a tight-lipped grin that didn't match the resentment flickering underneath. At dinner they talked around me, not with me, forced updates, clipped sentences, nothing genuine. And every time my fork clinked against the plate, someone flinched. Like the sound interrupted something they didn't want me to hear. I could still feel the weakness in my legs from the collapse, but the chill settling in my chest cut deeper. Whatever brought them to send that desperate message. It wasn't love, concern, or guilt. It was something they were trying very hard to hide. I noticed the cracks the next morning, not in the walls of the house but in the way everyone moved. Grant paced the hallway before sunrise, muttering under his breath as he shuffled through papers he thought I couldn't see. Lorraine hovered around the kitchen table, smoothing the same stack of envelopes again and again, her eyes darting every time I walked past. Celia stayed glued to her phone, whispering urgently, her tone sharp, impatient, like she was counting down to something. I pretended to make coffee just to stay in the room long enough to catch more. Grant slammed a folder shut when I approached. Lorraine shoved a pile of mail into a drawer. Celia slipped outside to take another call. The fear in their movements wasn't about me being home. It was about something collapsing around them. I found the truth by accident. The drawer Lorraine had closed wasn't fully latched. When she stepped outside to meet Grant in the yard, I opened it. Envelopes spilled out. Final notices, overdue statements, warnings. Her name, Grant's name, sometimes both. Medical charges. Contractor supply fees. Missed payments. Stamped in red. Upstairs another piece clicked. Celia's suitcase sat half open on her bed, not filled with clothes but documents. Maps, apartment listings, notes scribbled with "Thorn says go now," and "leave before it hits." She wasn't planning a trip. She was planning an escape. Then came the final blow. A call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice asked for me by name and mentioned my account. Confused, I asked what account. The brief pause on the other end was enough. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I hung up and went searching. Grant's office door, normally locked, had been left cracked open. Inside, scattered across the desk, were credit applications, statements under my name, charges I'd never made, signatures that weren't mine. My handwriting, copied but wrong enough to make my stomach drop. They hadn't just kept their problems from me. They had dragged my name into them. When Grant walked in and saw me holding the papers, his face drained of color. He didn't even try to deny it. He just whispered, "We needed help." Like that made it anything less than a betrayal. Backup labor. Spare wallet. Convenient daughter. That was all I was to them. And they expected me to clean up what was already sinking. The house was dark except for the thin strip of light slipping from under the living room door. I had gone downstairs for water, but the voices stopped me before I stepped off the last stair. Celia's voice, sharp, mocking, cut through the quiet. She couldn't even stay upright at her own ceremony, she scoffed. Too fragile to function, but sure, she'll fix everything for us. My fingers tightened around the railing. The collapse wasn't a joke to me, but to her it was entertainment. Lorraine sighed, heavy and exhausted. This tension started the moment she came back. She always brings chaos with her. I don't know how many times we have to go through this. Chaos. Trauma. Inconvenience. Words they never said to my face but carried like truth when they thought I wasn't listening. Then Grant spoke, low and blunt. "We called her because someone has to take responsibility in this family, and it sure as hell isn't Celia. She's never stepped up. She never will." Celia scoffed again. "I'm not the one who ran off to play student and act surprised when adulthood hits." Lorraine hushed them, but there was no softness in it. "Stop arguing. As long as she's here, we have a chance to get things under control. A chance. Not a daughter. Not a person still recovering. A chance." Grant exhaled sharply. "She can work. She can straighten out the accounts. She owes us that much after everything we've done." "Everything they've done?" My chest tightened. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. They weren't worried about my well-being. They weren't concerned about the hospital call they ignored. They were sorting out how to use me more efficiently. Celia laughed under her breath. "Fine. But I'm not babysitting her sickness. If she collapses again, that's on you too." My vision blurred, not from tears but from something colder, understanding. Grant only reached out because he'd run out of options. Lorraine didn't want me home, she wanted a solution. Celia didn't see me as anything but a burden unless I was convenient. Standing there in the hallway barefoot and weak, I realized the truth with painful clarity. They didn't want me. They wanted what I could provide. And as long as I stayed, they'd keep taking until there was nothing left of me to collapse. I packed quietly, moving with the kind of steady focus that only comes after a breaking point. My body still felt weak, but my mind was clear. I wasn't staying another night in that house. Not after hearing the truth spilled so carelessly in the dark. I folded what little I'd brought, zipped my bag and headed toward the front door before dawn, hoping to slip out unnoticed. Grant caught me before my hand touched the handle. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice cracked like he'd rehearsed steadiness and failed. When I didn't answer, he stepped closer, blocking the exit. "You can't walk out now. Not when we need you." That word hit like a familiar bruise. Need. Not want. Not love. I'm leaving, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm done. He shook his head, disbelief twisting into something desperate. You're really going to abandon your own family? After everything we've carried alone? You know how selfish that looks. I didn't flinch. Trying to guilt me isn't going to work. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Just stay a little longer. Help us get things sorted. You owe us that much. I don't owe you my life, I said quietly. His jaw tightened, but before he could argue again, Celia's voice drifted from the backyard, sharp and hurried. I froze. She wasn't alone. Thorn. I recognized his low murmur. I stepped away from Grant and listened, staying hidden behind the doorway. She's not going anywhere, Celia whispered. Not until we get the paperwork finished. Thorn sounded irritated. You said she wouldn't notice any of it. Well, she did, Celia snapped. So we use her info again and get out before it blows up. If she leaves now, we lose everything. My stomach dropped. The word hit harder than the rest. Whatever they'd already taken wasn't enough. They were planning more. Plans whispered like strategy, my name tossed around like currency. Grant kept talking behind me, still trying to convince me to stay, but his voice faded under the weight of what I'd just heard. They weren't scared of losing me. They were scared of losing access to me. I stepped back into the hallway, gripping my bag handle so tightly my knuckles whitened. Whatever I'd felt before didn't compare to the cold certainty settling in now. This wasn't a family crisis. This was exploitation. Deliberate. Calculated. And this time I wasn't running because I was weak. I was leaving because I finally understood the danger of staying. I waited until the house settled into its usual late-night hush, that thin quiet where every sound feels sharper. I wasn't leaving without answers, not this time. The office door, usually locked, had been left cracked open earlier in the evening. I pushed it gently, wincing at the faint creak, and slipped inside. Papers covered the desk in messy stacks, but one thick folder sat buried beneath a ledger. I pulled it out, expecting more overdue bills. Instead, my own name stared back at me. Page after page. Forms I'd never seen. Agreements I'd never signed. And at the bottom of each one, a signature meant to be mine. Crooked, wrong, but close enough that someone who didn't know me would believe it. Alone. A massive one. Already slipping into collections. My breath caught as I flipped through the documents, each page worse than the last. Grant hadn't stumbled into financial trouble, he'd dragged my identity into it. Used it like spare lumber. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. A decision. A choice. Footsteps passed in the hallway and I froze. Lorraine's voice drifted faintly from the kitchen, a trembling whisper. She can't find out. If she does, everything collapses. Celia's voice followed, blunt and unbothered. She won't. She never checks anything. And even if she does, she won't do anything about it. They weren't scared of the truth. They were confident I'd stay quiet. I sank into the chair, staring at the signature again. The loops were wrong. The angle was off. A stranger trying to mimic me. I imagined Grant hunched over this desk, pen in hand, copying strokes from old notebooks. Celia watching, encouraging. Lorraine pretending not to know. The weight of it pressed down on my chest. Not shock, not panic, but recognition. All those years of being treated like an afterthought weren't just neglect. They were grooming me to carry burdens they never planned to face themselves. My collapse at graduation flashed through my mind. Knees buckling, vision blurring, body giving out. I thought it was exhaustion. Stress. Illness. Now it felt like something else entirely. Like every unspoken expectation, every quiet dismissal, every subtle extraction had stacked inside me until something finally broke. I closed the folder, forcing my hands steady. They hadn't just failed me. They had used me. Designed their survival around my silence. And until that moment I had never given them a reason to fear that silence ending. I didn't confront anyone that night. I didn't slam doors or demand explanations. I moved quietly, staying invisible in the same house where they'd treated me like an afterthought for years. This time, invisibility was an advantage. Every drawer left ajar, every envelope half hidden, every careless sentence drifting through the walls became a piece of something I could finally control. I started with the forged documents. I photographed each page, every mismatched curve of the fake signature, every date, every number. Then I opened Grant's computer, guessing the password on the first try. My birthday. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside I found drafts of emails, applications, scanned forms, all tied to the same loan. I copied everything onto a portable drive and deleted nothing. The untouched files were just as useful as the ones they'd tried to hide. The next night I waited until the usual arguments rose again, low, bitter voices leaking from the living room. I set my phone near the crack in the door, letting their own words become evidence. Celia's mocking confidence, Lorraine's anxious justifications, Grant's blunt admissions. Everything recorded cleanly, every sentence another nail in the structure they'd built on my name. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed someone who knew how to use it. Avery Trask answered on the second ring. I hadn't spoken to her since she tutored me through calculus in high school, but I remembered her sharpness, the way she broke down complicated problems without ever raising her voice. Now she was an attorney, one with a reputation for untangling messes other people created. I met her in her small office 2 towns over, documents stuffed in my backpack. She listened without interrupting, her expression tightening only slightly as she flipped through the photos and recordings. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm but firm. "This isn't a mistake," she said. "It's a pattern. And we can take it apart." We spent hours mapping everything out. The forged loan, the unauthorized credit use, the conversations that proved they all knew exactly what they were doing. Avery explained each step, each option, each potential outcome. I didn't react. I couldn't. My mind stayed cold, clear, focused. By the time I left her office, the plan was set. Not revenge through shouting or burning bridges. Not chaos. Precision. Timing. Truth delivered at the moment it would matter most. Back at the house, I moved through the rooms quietly, not giving away a single shift in my expression. They thought silence made me easy to use. They had no idea how powerful silence becomes when it's finally deliberate. I chose a morning when everyone was home, the air already tight with unspoken tension. They gathered in the living room without needing to be called. Something in my posture must have told them this wasn't another quiet morning. I stood in front of them with a folder in my hands, the same one I had found buried under Grant's ledgers. Grant crossed his arms, trying to look authoritative. Lorraine twisted a dish towel between her fingers. Celia rolled her eyes, already annoyed. None of them expected what came next. I set the folder on the coffee table and opened it. "These are the documents you signed under my name." Grant's face went still. "You're misunderstanding." I held up a printed photo of the forged signature. "This is not my handwriting." Lorraine's breath hitched. Celia scoffed, leaning back like she was bored with the truth laid out in front of her. Before any of them could recover, I placed my phone next to the papers. "And these are recordings. Every conversation you thought I didn't hear." Celia lurched forward. "You recorded us? Are you insane?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm done being your backup plan." Grant tried again. "You don't know what you're doing. Those recordings mean nothing." I pressed play. His own voice filled the room, admitting why he contacted me. Celia's faded laughter followed, mocking my collapse. Lorraine's whisper, fearful, complicit, layered over all of it. Lorraine covered her face, tears spilling instantly. "We didn't know what else to do." Celia snapped, pointing at Grant. "He started it. I told you she'd find out eventually." Grant glared back. "You were the one pushing it. You and that boyfriend of yours." They turned on each other with the speed of people who'd been holding blame in their pockets for years. Accusations flew, louder and harsher with each sentence. Every denial exposed another truth. Every defense tore open old wounds. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I let them unravel. When the shouting hit its peak, I spoke over it. Calm, steady, firm. "You have 2 options. Cooperate legally or deal with the consequences alone. I'm done carrying any of this." Silence hit as sharply as the noise had. They stared at me like the ground had shifted beneath them. I didn't wait for answers. I picked up my bag, turned away from the collapsing scene, and walked out of the house without looking back. Behind me, their voices rose again, angry, desperate, panicked, crashing into each other like the final pieces of a structure finally giving way. I didn't stop walking. Their chaos stayed behind me where it belonged. The call came on a quiet afternoon, the kind where sunlight spills lazily across a kitchen counter. The voice on the other end was professional, measured, confirming details about the account in question. They weren't accusing me, they were verifying facts, ensuring the fraud claim was legitimate. Relief washed over me in uneven waves, mingling with the exhaustion of weeks spent strategizing and waiting. News came slowly after that. Grant received summons and legal notices, each one heavier than the last, until it became clear his control had ended. Lorraine's attempts to hide her involvement crumbled as documents and recordings were presented in court, leaving her scrambling for excuses. Celia, caught off guard, tried to avoid responsibility, even talking about leaving the state, but the legal system demanded her testimony, forcing her into the spotlight she had long feared. One by one, the family's defenses fell apart, exposing years of manipulation and secrecy. I found a small apartment in Benton Creek, a modest space far from the shadows of my family home. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, stacking dishes, arranging furniture, and claiming every corner as a piece of myself. Part-time work gave structure and purpose without consuming all of my energy, and for the first time I allowed myself to rest without guilt. Each day I felt layers of tension peel away, replaced with a cautious, growing confidence. Simple things: a cup of coffee in the morning, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of neighbors moving through their routines, reminded me that life could exist without constant manipulation or expectation. I began reconnecting with friends I'd pushed aside, people who had never judged me or used me. Though scars remained, they served as reminders, not shackles. The weight of betrayal lingered, but so did the strength I had gathered in reclaiming my life. Each evening, I allowed myself to feel a quiet pride for the first time, for navigating a house of lies, for facing deception with strategy instead of rage, and for stepping out alone into the world I had earned. Benton Creek became more than a town. It became the place where I rebuilt the boundaries, the routines, and the calm I had been denied for years. Here, at last, the chapters of my life were being written on my own terms. The call came late in the morning, unexpected and tentative. Grant's voice wavered, unsteady, each word heavy with a plea I hadn't heard in years. "Maren, please, can we talk? I need to explain. I'm sorry." I listened silently, letting the pause stretch, letting the memory of everything sink into the space between us. When I agreed, it was on my terms. I chose the cafe near Benton Creek, neutral territory, public enough that no one could hide behind walls or excuses. Grant arrived, posture stiff, hands twisting nervously. His eyes searched for softness, for a spark of the daughter he thought he still controlled. I placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside was the final piece of evidence, the paperwork severing every last legal connection. His eyes widened as he recognized the stack, the culmination of months of planning and quiet work. "You did all this?" he whispered, a mix of disbelief and fear threading his tone. I met his gaze, steady, calm, unyielding. "I did what I had to do," I said. My voice carried no anger, only clarity. "This isn't about revenge. It's about the truth. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. Everything is over." He opened his mouth, started to speak, then closed it again. Words faltered, excuses died before they formed. I waited, letting the silence press the weight of years onto him. And then I simply stood, collected my bag, and walked toward the door. Outside, the crisp air felt different, clean, expansive. I inhaled it deeply, letting it fill the space my family had once dominated. For the first time, each step forward was unclaimed, entirely mine. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was stepping into a life I'd earned through patience, strategy, and resolve. Later, my phone buzzed with a new opportunity. A position I had applied for months earlier, one that aligned with the future I envisioned for myself. I smiled at the message, a small, private celebration. The apartment keys in my pocket, the sun on my face, the knowledge that every decision I'd made had led here. It was intoxicating. I hadn't screamed, hadn't shouted, hadn't burned bridges. I'd dismantled their influence quietly, deliberately, and in doing so reclaimed my autonomy. My revenge had never been about pain. It had been about freedom. And now, for the first time in my life, freedom was mine to keep. Do you think I was right to walk away after everything, or should I have tried to forgive them? I'm torn but finally free. Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective.